There's no doubt about it, the average new car in America is significantly more expensive than it used to be. For the 2024 model year, there are just 12 new vehicles in the United States available for under $25,000, including the average sales tax rate. The Nissan Versa is among the least expensive of the bunch, starting at $17,820, including destination. And even if you get carried away with options, including some aftermarket accessories like this one has on it, the price tag is still going to be under $23,000 before sales tax. For 2025, we don't know exactly what the future holds for the Nissan Versa. It looks like it's going to come back, probably still going to be very affordable, but we also know that that number of vehicles under $25,000, it's going to go down to about 8 for 2025. So this is going to be in an even smaller segment next year. Once upon a time, the Versa had a ton of competition in the US. The Rio, the Accent, the Yaris, the Mazda 2, the Spark, the Sonic, the Fiesta, and so many more were all competing for the hearts, minds, and wallets of the subcompact shopper. But they've all sailed off into the sunset. Some because manufacturers said it was more profitable to build bigger and more expensive vehicles. That's the main reason the Fiesta's gone. But actual sales numbers are the reason that so many of the others left as well. The Versa, it's not been immune, even though we have a shrinking segment and you would assume that would really focus sales on vehicles remaining like this and the Mitsubishi Mirage. That hasn't actually happened. Back in 2015, Nissan sold over 140,000 Versas. Last year, they sold just 24,000. And to be honest, customers like me and you and everybody else watching out there, we're all to blame for the shrinking of this kind of segment. Because a lot of shoppers have said, you know, instead of buying a new Versa, how about I buy something like a used Honda Civic? So we're definitely going to talk about that in this video. I will say that in a nutshell, the big reason you want to get a Versa over anything used is going to be new car warranty, new car paint, new car finish on the inside, and long-term cost of operations. Because pretty much any way you slice it, buying a new Versa is going to be less expensive than buying the average used car out there that is similarly priced to this, because it's not going to have a new car warranty, so you're going to incur a lot more maintenance and repair costs within the first 4 to 5 years or so. Depending on exactly what you're cross-shopping the Versa against, one reason to get this over some used cars might be the active safety tech. We find autonomous emergency braking and blind spot monitoring on this model, and we have full LED headlights here. Now you should know that the LED headlights happen only in the top-end SR trim. That's the SR badging right there in that grille. All the other versions of the Versa, they're going to have somewhat dimmer halogen headlights, and these are definitely my preference. I would say these actually compete very well against Camry and Accord, also Corolla and Civic, but if you get the halogen headlights, they're going to be noticeably dimmer than the rest of the crowd. The other thing you should know, of course, is that this is going to be significantly narrower and smaller than something like the average compact sedan, or of course some of those bigger mid-size used sedans that you might be cross-shopping. This is 68.5 inches wide. That's about 2 to 3 inches narrower than something like a Sentra or a Civic, and significantly narrower than something like a used Accord or a used Camry. That is going to mean the interior is going to be a little bit tighter, but again, you're getting a brand new car with a brand new paint job. You're also going to get a car that I think looks pretty decent. Nissan recently gave this a facelift up front, and they brought the front end design, including this grille area here and the headlight design, in line with the rest of the modern Nissan envelope. Of course, if you want something even more modern, there is going to be the Nissan Kicks. I'm actually going to be driving that next week, so be sure and stay tuned for that video if it hasn't already dropped. But that has a very different look than this, and it looks like it's going to be more expensive as well. On a personal level, I have to applaud Nissan, General Motors, and a few other car companies for, at least for the moment, bringing affordable cars to the US market. A lot of car companies have left the affordable segment for some very logical reasons, mainly centering around profitability. You see, a lot of customers out there think that a $20,000 car like this should cost half as much as a $40,000 car to design, manufacture, transport, warranty, etc. And that's not the case. The cost structure for designing, developing, and manufacturing this is largely similar to a Nissan Altima, even though the Altima is notably bigger. And that's because you still have to design an engine and a transmission. You still have to manufacture them. There is less raw material going on in a smaller car like this, but the actual cost of the raw material, the raw steel, etc., it's not the biggest part of the cost of a car. And of course, the warranty and the inventory costs, the shipping and transport costs, etc., they're all largely similar one vehicle to another. So it simply means that the smaller the car, the smaller the profit margin on their side. And that's why, even though we do find cash on the hood of this and the Sentra, you don't find as much cash on the hood as you will in bigger and more expensive vehicles. Now, speaking of size, this is 177 inches long. It's about 7 inches longer than the Mitsubishi Mirage, but it is about 5 inches shorter than the average compact sedan. So if you're cross-shopping this against something like a used Civic or a used Elantra, you should definitely keep the size of the vehicles in mind. On the other hand, you are going to get a brand new paint job. Let me know what you think of the Versa's design in the comment section. I have to admit, I think it's relatively good looking, especially compared to the other inexpensive vehicles in the US. I'm also surprised that Nissan's design language actually translated to a smaller vehicle as cohesively as it does. They recently gave this a refresh, as I said before. Part of that was new taillights, so we have this sort of chevron theme to this taillight module, fully incandescent, of course. Keep in mind the price tag, but we do have amber turn signals here. There's a little bit of a lip spoiler on the SR trim, which I do find kind of silly. There's a single exhaust tip over there on that side, and rear parking sensors that are not the best integrated to the bumper, but you know, at least it has them. As we dive under the hood, it is important to set expectations appropriately, i.e., relatively low, although not bargain basement like we find in the Mitsubishi Mirage. You might have noticed I haven't said much about the Mirage yet. The main reason is I find the Mirage dreadful, and a big part of that is what's happening under its hood. It has a 1.2-liter engine producing just 78 horsepower. You'll find a better power-to-weight ratio on a bunch of e-bikes. This is not exactly exciting, but it is significantly better. 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine here, producing 122 horsepower, 114 pound-feet of torque. That's a pretty massive improvement over the Mirage. There are 2 transmissions offered. If you get the base model only, it starts with a 5-speed manual. Every other Versa is going to have this transmission, the continuously variable automatic. I know a lot of folks out there are not big fans of Nissan's CVTs. It's not the most exciting to drive, but it is going to give you at least 5 miles per gallon better fuel economy in mixed driving, and on the open highway about 10 miles per gallon in real-world driving versus the 5-speed manual. So it is going to be significantly more efficient. If you're concerned about long-term durability of a CVT, I would say 2 things. The first one is the Versa's CVT seems to be notably more reliable than the bigger engine CVT pairings that we find in the Nissan lineup. So versus the previous generation Pathfinder with a V6 and a CVT, this is definitely more reliable. The other thing I would say is just get the 5-speed manual and give up a lot of the feature content you're going to see on this model. Jumping inside, this is another area where you're going to need to set your expectations appropriately because obviously things are fairly basic here. Manual seats are the only way to go in the Versa. There's no power seat option, but we do have a steering column that not only tilts, it also telescopes. The range of motion is not as big as some might hope for, but it is going to be easier for shorter and taller drivers to find a solid driving position. And speaking of driving position, I find this is actually pretty comfortable. It's a little bit more upright than some people might suspect, and the roofline is actually a little bit higher as well. So I have maybe about 2 inches of headroom sitting in a relatively upright position. That helps give people in the back just a little bit more room than you might expect. Nissan has been known for pretty comfortable seat designs, but I will say that the Versa's seats are a little bit less comfortable than the seats that we find in something like the Altima or the more expensive products in the Nissan lineup. I also think that the seating position in the upcoming Nissan Kicks is a little bit more comfortable, so if you are looking for something more upright, check out the Kicks. But keep in mind, it is going to be notably more expensive than this. We don't have pricing at the point I'm filming this video, but I suspect it's going to be solidly over $25,000 starting. So, you know, exactly where the ball lands there, that's going to determine whether this is really going to be in contention with that Kicks for the affordable side of things. Hopping into the back, there's a little bit more room than you might suspect. This front seat's adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, and I have maybe about 3.5, 4 inches of legroom there. The bigger problem in the Versa is going to be headroom. I'll scoot over to this side so you can see what's going on. If I want to put my head anywhere near that head restraint in the back, I have to kind of crane my head to one side. It's just not that comfortable for taller folks. But interestingly, the front seats are actually above average for taller people. This seat is comfortably adjusted for a 6'5" passenger I had sitting in the vehicle. You can see my legroom has been reduced to about 2 inches there, but the seat back is actually not all the way back in its tracks. It could move about 2 inches further rearward. So if you have long legs, you might want to check out this before you check out some of the other subcompact vehicles out there. You may find a little bit more room up front at least. No moonroof there, of course, which is why we have that extra headroom in the front. Now in the back, we have 60/40 folding rear seat backs, no folding armrest, no cup holders in the middle, but we do have some storage pockets on the doors that I suppose you could use kind of like cup holders. Obviously, no air vents here in the center console. It is an affordable vehicle, but we do have a USB-C charge port. Surprisingly though, even if you move up to a Honda Civic, you're not going to find rear air vents either. Here's a closer look at that center console with the USB-C charge port. I don't normally talk a lot about car carpet because honestly, most cars have very similar quality carpet, but here we have what looks more like trunk liner, so I would definitely recommend getting floor mats. Behind the trunk lid manual, of course, we find a surprising amount of storage space, 15 cubic feet. That's above average for a compact sedan and actually a little bit bigger than you'll find in a lot of the mid-size sedans. It's about the same size trunk that we find in the Toyota Camry, actually. However, unlike the previous version of the Versa, you can no longer put a 22-inch roller bag in this position and still close the trunk lid because the trunk actually got a little bit shallower. That's mainly due to the slightly sleeker styling and slightly sleeker roofline that we find in the Versa. On the other hand, it is still a really boxy cargo area thanks to the rear suspension design and actually the relatively short trunk lid, which means that these bars don't actually impede on the cargo capacity quite as much as you might think. Also, there is some wasted space under the floor. You'll notice we have these huge foam blocks on this cargo area load floor. Cargo area load floor, by the way, is pretty flippy floppy there. And then we have a teeny tiny spare tire under that with a lot of what I would say is wasted space. It's all down to the price tag, of course, of the Versa. They couldn't afford to give us a two-tiered load floor and have a base price where it is. As we look around the interior together, keep in mind the price tag of the Versa and of course the price tag of this particular model, which is the most expensive trim. Up here we have incandescent dome lights, no LEDs here. We have the SOS button for the telematic system, and the headliner, it's not one of those woven fabric headliners that you'd find in a more expensive car. Again, keep the price tag in mind, but we do have sun visors with sliding extensions. That's kind of a nice touch there. And in case you're wondering, this model does have vanity mirrors for both the driver and the front passenger, but you'll notice no lights on those vanity mirrors. We do have a grab handle over there for the passenger. Actually, all four window and door openings have a grab handle as well. We then have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger there. Two-way adjustable headrests, and since we're in the SR trim, we get this different upholstery here, which has the red accents on the outside and different patterns going on there on the center seat back and seat bottom cushion. We don't have terribly aggressive bolstering on the seat back and bottom cushion, but it is a little bit more aggressive, I would say, than what we find in the Hyundai Venue. Then moving over to the front doors, we find a tiny bit of soft touch material. This is a sort of a stitched imitation leather there for your arm on the door, but keep in mind it's a small car, so taller folks, their arms are going to be kind of about there on that little hard plastic section of the B-pillar. We also find some sort of interesting textures going on here, kind of a carbon fiber-esque treatment to that section around the window switches and locks. Kind of nice touch in an inexpensive vehicle. We do actually have a door lock button for the passenger side. That's something that actually a decent number of inexpensive cars around the world tend to delete. The rest of the door, that's of course all hard plastic, including that bottle holder down there at the bottom of the door. Now, speaking of bottle holders, we should go back here so you can see the sort of cup holder bottle holder back there for the rear passengers. Basically, you wouldn't want any of the people in the back to have a takeout drink because that's just going to get everywhere. Moving back over to the dashboard, we do have a soft touch insert right there in the middle of the dashboard. It's made of the same material as the armrest over there on the passenger side, so that gives it a little bit of extra feel there. We also have a hard plastic upper portion of the dash, but it's textured to look like it's a bit softer. Interestingly, not quite the same texture we find lower on the dashboard, where we find a bin-style glove compartment. I was barely able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer in there. It kind of sits sideways and can sort of ride on top of the instruction manual. In the middle of the dashboard, we find the touchscreen infotainment system. Now, you won't find Apple CarPlay or Android Auto on the base model, although every version is going to get Bluetooth. So at the very least, you could do Bluetooth with your phone. If you want this system with the CarPlay and Android Auto functionality, then you're gonna have to get the SV or the SR trim. Those are the only ones with that option. Big air vents there up top, and this one has the automatic climate control. That's an option, but every model is going to at least have air conditioning. Down below that, we have a 12-volt power port, a USB-C and a USB-A input, and a decent amount of room to store your smartphone there. It's actually a pretty decently sized storage cubby. The engine start-stop button is here for this trim. If you don't get keyless go, There's going to actually be a key right over there. We have a pretty typical console shifter there, drive and low. And then we have two medium-sized cup holders here in the middle. One thing I do appreciate, I wish they were a little bit bigger, but I am happy that they're actually far enough apart that you can put some of those larger drinks and they won't be right on top of each other. We also have a handbrake here, which is kind of a novelty that we don't find in too many new vehicles. Bearing in mind the size of the car, the center armrest is pretty tiny. It opens to reveal a similarly tiny storage compartment with a single USB-C charge port. Moving over to the driver's side, you'll notice that the upper dashboard component is all one piece, so the binnacle over the instrument cluster is that same hard material. I didn't notice any glare issues though, so they did a pretty good job with the texture. That's one reason that a lot of car companies actually use a soft touch upper dashboard component, is it seems to create less of a reflection issue on the windshield. But again, this one didn't have a particular problem. Moving down from there, we find a partial LCD instrument cluster, so the tachometer and multifunction display, etc., that's all on the LCD. This is where we would adjust some vehicle settings, see our tire pressure, fuel economy, infotainment readouts, etc. Then we have a physical speedometer on the right. And then moving out from there, we find the pretty typical Nissan steering wheel, flat bottom there, leather wrapped in this particular trim with contrasting stitching, and a teeny tiny little sport grip up top. Over here we find the controls for that multifunction cluster, also volume up, down, and track forward, backward there on that side. Then on the right side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the cruise control system. Now, speaking of cruise control, some of you might have noticed this little button. That's because the SR trim now gets adaptive cruise control. So that's another reason you might want to get this over some used cars that might not have that particular feature. What's the key look like? I'm glad you asked. Here it is. It is actually the newest Nissan key design, so not the older egg-shaped key, although keep in mind we are in a model with keyless go. All right, it's time to get the Versa out on the road. We're just gonna floor it right from a stop there. This, of course, is not an enormous amount of power. If you start from a complete stop, you'll notice the CVT behaves like CVTs always used to. It just hangs out there at that particular RPM. But it is gonna scoot 0 to 60 faster than if it imitated shifts. I'll give you an example here. So for instance, if I slow down to maybe about 10 miles an hour and then I floor it, it eventually gets up there to about 6,000 RPM, but then it's going to start imitating the shifts. That's actually going to get you 0 to 60 slower. So if you want that fastest acceleration time, you do need to start from an absolute complete stop. And if you do, this will scoot 0 to 60 in 9.8 seconds. It's not terribly impressive, but honestly, it's not far off of where a Prius used to be or a decent number of other compact and subcompact cars. The main thing for most folks is that this feels like it can get out of its own way. You wouldn't want to try and do a lot of highway passing maneuvers, but as far as accelerating up to get on a freeway, going from stoplight to stoplight, this is perfectly acceptable. Of course, you are going to hear a decent amount of engine noise coming from under the hood. And that acceleration time is the big difference between this and the Mitsubishi Mirage. The Mirage is significantly slower. Stopping distance, we measured 122 feet from 60 miles an hour back to 0. Keep in mind, of course, we are in the SR trim, and the wheel and tires do change around trim level to trim level. Clearly, something like a Honda Civic is going to be more exciting, but I would say this holds its own compared to something like a Toyota Corolla, and the Corolla is going to be a bit heavier, so 0 to 60 performance in the base Corolla is not really going to be that much better than the model that we're taking a look at here, although you will certainly get more sound isolation between the engine and the passenger compartment. And we should probably talk about that. Definitely one thing you'll notice out on the road is the level of sound deadening. One big difference between this and the rest of the larger competition, or something like a Buick Envista. The Buick Envista is, about this same size or so. It's trying to be kind of a sedan. It's trying to be a little bit more premium, and its price tag is certainly higher than this. It starts right around that $25,000 mark, including sales tax, but it is going to be quieter inside with more sound deadening. At 50 miles an hour, we measured 74 decibels in this cabin, and that definitely puts this on the loud side of things. It goes up a little bit, of course, if the engine is really doing its thing. Out on a rougher road like the one that we're on here, the Versa does relatively well. We have a little bit of extra cushion on these tires than you find on a lot of new vehicles. That certainly helps soak up some of the bumps. And the suspension doesn't become as upset over broken pavement as you might think. Of course, we don't have an independent suspension in the rear, but architecturally, there is not an enormous amount of difference between this vehicle's suspension and what we find in a Mazda 3. The Mazda 3 doesn't have a fully independent rear either, and actually a reasonable number of compact cars don't. Some do, some have versions that have optional independent suspensions in the back, but there are a reasonable number that don't. So as far as handling and ride quality, etc., the nature of the suspension, there's not an enormous amount of difference. Back out on the paved road, let's talk about the drive modes, because there are, I suppose, 3 drive modes you could say. We have drive, we have low, and then we have sport. There is a teeny tiny little sport button actually hidden kind of on the back of the shifter there. Not everybody sees it, but it is there. Basically, it's sort of low and lower for the CVT. So if it's in low, it wants to keep the RPMs for most uses around 3,000 RPM or so. It's going to make it feel more engaging on a road like this, although I am floored at this moment. Now, if I put it back in drive and engage sport, it's going to be a little bit more aggressive, I think, at changing ratios. They're still not going to be as quick as the ratio changes we find in a Honda Civic. And again, you know, just over 100 horsepower here, so all those expectations should be kept in check. But you know, again, it's a surprising amount of fun. It also is surprisingly efficient. Over a week of mixed driving, we've been averaging 40 miles per gallon, 40.2 to be specific. That is pretty significant, especially compared to most of the low-cost options in this segment. If you take a look at a Chevy Trax or a Buick Envista, they're not going to cost an awful lot, but the fuel efficiency is not going to be where we find this. And even though they have a 6-speed automatic, which some people prefer, they're also going to have a small displacement turbocharged 3-cylinder engine under the hood. And not everybody is the biggest fan of a turbo or a 3-cylinder or any expected maintenance costs. Now, personally, I like that drivetrain better than this one. If I chose, I would be willing to give up some fuel economy for the feel of the turbo and that 6-speed automatic. But again, if you're concerned about that, then you could take a look at some of these other options. It's worth noting that the Trax and the Envista are the only regular automatic transmission equipped vehicles in this segment. And they're one of the few, even if you expand that out to the compact car segment. You can get, of course, a regular automatic transmission in the Mazda 3, but it's still going to be a 6-speed, of course. It's not going to be an 8-speed in that model. Bottom line, out on the road, the Versa is surprisingly fun to drive. I'd rather drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow, something that I've said a million times before, but it is really true in something like the Versa. The low-to-the-ground nature, the lightweight feel of it, the fact that we don't actually have that much sound deadening, all means it's pretty easy to tell exactly what's going on up front, in the back, etc. Of course, there's not a lot of steering feel because this has electric power steering, and it's a relatively inexpensive power steering rack at that. But everything together, you know, it's surprisingly fun once you get past some of the gruffness of the drivetrain. Now, that's another reason, of course, that you might want to get this over a used car, because if you're buying a car with 100,000 miles on the clock, not everything is going to feel as new and as tight as it would in something like a brand new Versa. From the steering to the noises the drivetrain is making to the brakes, everything, etc. here is brand new. And in something else, maybe there's going to be a little bit more slop in the steering. Maybe the suspension is going to have a little bit of a rattle because the ball joints are a little bit more worn. All of that is going to factor into the new versus used conversation. Now let's get down to brass tacks. The base Versa is going to be pretty basic, and that's why we have that low sticker price, $17,820, including destination. Plus tax, title, and license, this is one of the very few vehicles that could be under $20,000 out the door in the US. Keep in mind that depending on where you are in the US, you may get an additional $500 to $1,000 off of the price tag of a Versa. Remember, as I said before, building a Versa is not necessarily less expensive than building a Sentra, and that's why you may find slightly more cash on the hood of a Sentra. However, when we actually crunched the numbers, at least last quarter in the US, the average transaction price of a Sentra was a whopping 15% more than a Versa, about $4,000. So on average, the Versa is going to be less expensive. If you're the kind of person that doesn't really care about a 15% cost increase, clearly go buy the more expensive car. That's not who the Versa is for. This is for the person that really wants to spend as little as possible on a brand new car with brand new car paint and a brand new car warranty. That is the big deal here. If you're shopping something like a 4 or a 5-year-old Civic or a Corolla, they're not going to have a warranty. If you buy a CPO car, from a certified pre-owned car I should say, from a Honda dealer or a Toyota dealer, etc., they may have a CPO warranty, but you're going to be paying a lot more than you would for that same car on the open market, simply for that added assurance of the warranty. This is going to have a 3-year, 36,000-mile bumper-to-bumper warranty and a 5-year, 60,000-mile powertrain warranty. That is the big reason to get the Versa over a used car. If you want to send your kid off to college, you want them to have affordable transportation with a relatively low and affordable price tag, financing, remember, is going to be less expensive, generally speaking, on a new car than a used car. That's what the Versa is for. You don't have to worry about, what happens if something goes wrong in the first 5 years, because it should be covered, especially critical components like the engine and the transmission. Of course, logically, the other big reason that we see shrinking sales in this segment that I haven't addressed so far is the increase in certified pre-owned used car sales and just used car sales in general. Cars are lasting longer and longer than they ever have before in North America, and that's part of why affordable entry-level vehicles like this have fallen a little bit by the wayside, because I could definitely see some logical reasons to get something like a Camry or a Civic or a Corolla or an Elantra or over something like a Versa. If you could get a Camry for $22,000 with a CPO warranty on it, I'd probably buy that over this. It's not going to be as easy to park, but the fuel economy is going to be pretty similar. It probably is going to be a little bit more long-term reliable. Keep in mind though, when we were doing some cross shops, a 4-year-old Civic actually was about the same price as this model with 90,000 miles on it. And this, rolling off the dealer lot, would have like 5 or 10 miles on it. All that needs to be kept in mind, but let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Are you team new car? Keeping in mind you're going to get a smaller car, you're going to get a car that's going to be a little bit louder down the road, it's not going to feel as premium, or are you interested in paying a little bit more for financing, being prepared to have something that could be a little bit less reliable, but getting something bigger and maybe something a little bit more premium feeling, like a Accord or a Camry or even something like a Nissan Altima. Let me know what you think about that. Of course, find us over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those social places. And of course, remember that you can reach out to us to have your feedback included in future episodes of the podcast and our live show, etc., by calling that number down there at the bottom of your screen. Or you can also send a voice message to hey@autobuyersguide.com. Your choice, just please include your name, your question, of course, where you're calling us from, all that information. And we will see you in the next episode.